Well, hello, everyone. Really good to see you again. I'm Anne-Marie Green alongside Vladimir Duthier. Vlad, this is like a big week, right? We're going to see a new president be inaugurated, but at the same time, the business of the old administration, that's still something that we are talking about because we're also on the eve of a president being impeached for the second time. It's just really topsy-turvy. I can't even speak. The Capitol, which is normally, awash in visitors at this time, awash in tourists at this time, is awash in troops instead. Just crazy images coming out of Washington, D.C. right now.
Yeah, and as you say, Anne-Marie, and as our line producer Ross Cunningham said earlier to us this morning, we're starting the week with one president. We will end the week with a new president, but a lot of things are different this time around, including the security operation, as you mentioned, which is now underway in our nation's capital amid these growing fears of an insider attack ahead of President-elect Joe Biden's inauguration. The Associated Press reports the FBI is vetting all 25,000 National Guard troops pouring into Washington, D.C. for Wednesday's events. Officials say they became concerned after identifying several military and law enforcement officials in a number of videos from the deadly Capitol assault. And a CBS News poll reveals 54% of Americans believe the biggest threat to our way of life is other people in the United States, as opposed to foreign adversaries, the virus, or natural disasters and economic forces. This is unprecedented. Jeff Pegues is following the latest from the Capitol.
New video published by The New Yorker shows rioters pouring through a window into a hallway of the Capitol on January 6th. There, they told police why they say they were in the building.
We are listening to Trump, your boss.
They eventually gained access to the Senate chamber.
Hey, let's take a seat, people!
Some were searching for lawmakers. On the Senate floor, they rifled through papers looking for any valuable information.
I think Cruz would want us to do this, so yeah, absolutely. I think we're good.
And posed for photos.
I love you guys, you're brothers, but we can't be disrespectful.
Don't disrespect. They can steal an election when we can't sit in their chair?
No!
Seen in the video is Air Force veteran Larry Brock, who was carrying plastic zip ties that can function as makeshift handcuffs.
It's a PR war, okay? You have to understand it's an IO war. We can't lose the IO war.
Brock has been charged with knowingly entering or remaining in a restricted building and violent entry and disorderly conduct on Capitol grounds. Brock is one of at least 22 current or former members of the U.S. military or law enforcement who've been identified as being at or near the riot. That's according to the Associated Press, which also reports the defense officials' fear of possible inside attack at the inauguration. David Martin has asked General Daniel Hawkinson, the chief of the National Guard Bureau, about any internal concerns.
Are you worried at all about the reliability of your National Guard troops?
Absolutely not.
Have you been screening some of the troops as they come in?
Yes, sir. In coordination with the Secret Service and the FBI, they're screening all the personnel that are coming in.
The National Guard troops answer to the commander-in-chief, who until Wednesday at noon will still be President Trump. On 60 Minutes last night, Scott Pelley asked Acting Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security Ken Cuccinelli what they would do if Mr. Trump asked them to stand down.
We're going to complete our jobs. There's not a stand down. We have a statutory mission. We're going to perform under all circumstances, and I think that hypothetical is not going to happen. It's unimaginable.
All right, so Jeff Pegues is with us now to talk more about what we know. Jeff, there's always a lot of chatter on the internet, and determining sort of what's true and what's not is hard for everyone. So I'm wondering, are there any credible threats to Washington, D.C. and other state capitals right now, especially after the FBI warned of possible armed protests in all 50 states?
Well, I think you know this, and I think the American public is coming to grips with this, that the Capitol attack was a real wake-up call for law enforcement, and so they have been scouring the internet, following leads that take them to these anti-government types, these white supremacist types, these white nationalist types, to see if there is any credible threats of violence out there. And what we're seeing according to U.S. intelligence officials, is that in recent days, in terms of threats that they're seeing, some of them have cooled, especially as it relates to what's happening here in Washington, D.C. And I think part of that is this overwhelming show of force that you're seeing on the streets of Washington. And then you don't have the crowds here, as you alluded to in the opening of the broadcast, Anne Marie. And since you don't have the crowds of people here, it's easier for law enforcement to spot any potential threats out there on the streets. And so to answer your question, what we've heard from our sources is that some of this talk is cooling as it relates to what's happening in the Capitol. However, the concern remains, for making this as safe as you possibly can in terms of the inauguration, but also keeping an eye on what's happening out in the country in the 50 states, because there have been these threats for armed protest at the state capitals.
And Jeff, you mentioned in your piece, the AP reports officials are vetting all 25,000 National Guard troops in charge of securing the Capitol ahead of President-elect Joe Biden's inauguration. Of course, this comes amid the growing fears over a possible inside attack. I understand from Fran Townsend, who was on CBS this morning, that every inauguration, these are the kinds of things and the kinds of measures that are put into place, screening anybody who's going to be anywhere near the president-elect. But what does this tell you about the fear from far-right extremism among military and law enforcement in particular?
It just shows you how serious the threat is, Vlad. I mean, you've traveled overseas extensively. I've lived overseas, and I think when you think about an insider threat to an inauguration or some sort of event that involves a commander-in-chief, you think about what happens overseas sometimes when there are these assassination attempts, and I don't want to get into anything in particular, but I think you get my drift here. So the fact that we're talking about this right now as it relates to a U.S. inauguration is really stunning, but it speaks to the threat. And it is something that you have to be concerned about. I mean, given what we're seeing again in the weeks after, or in the days and weeks after this Capitol attack, this insurrection, the amount of law enforcement that has been taken into custody in connection with breaching the Capitol. Some people, either former or current National Guard, who've been caught up in this, arrested and charged. And so just to be safe, this is something that law enforcement in this country has to do right now, given the level of threat that they are seeing to this inauguration.
Certainly the members of law enforcement that we saw on that sort of riot that took over the Capitol, it was concerning, but that's not new. We've seen stories like that pop up before, local news stories where members of, local police force have been ratted out as members of some sort of extremist group. So I'm wondering, it's good that we're talking about it now, but I would think that this would have been something that the military, that law enforcement in this country had been talking about before. And are they doing anything about it?
I compare it, Anne Marie, to the kind of outrage we saw when cell phone videos started catching police-involved shootings and excessive force cases on camera. The world at large started realizing, oh, okay, we have a major problem here. And so I use that as a comparison because that's what we're seeing now. This Capitol attack, and I keep going back to it, but it was a real turning point for so many people in this country because you were able to see right in front of your eyes, caught on camera, and every day we're getting new video angles of this insurrection. You see the hatred, you see the energy behind this extremism in this country. And with this attack, you're also seeing that law enforcement is having to now deal with this because the public is aware. The public is seeing these members of law enforcement and or the military being arrested or charged in connection with this. And so now it's on the front page of papers everywhere. It's leading newscasts across the country. And so it's something that you just can't turn your head away from. And it's more than just an individual case. It's a problem. And you're seeing it in Tennessee, you're seeing it in states across this country. So it's not isolated to any one event, and that's why this has become real for so many people. And by the way, there are people who think that once we get through the inauguration, that all of this will go away. No, it's not going to go away. As the mayor of Washington, D.C. said recently, this is going to be a new normal. Just like after 9/11, we had a new normal. Now, after January 6th, we have a new normal. And it's sort of sobering to think about our world now in this way. But that's the way it's going to be, because I think the cover has been blown off. What has been a problem for some time, not only in law enforcement, but also in the military. And it's something that the military, this extremism issue, it's something that the military officials talked about openly last week, that they realize that this is a concern, and they're going to try, what they're saying is they're going to try and do whatever they can to root out those who may share those views. And law enforcement is going to have to do the same thing.
It is mind-boggling, remarkable to note, as we did earlier, that you mentioned 9/11, Jeff. In the wake of 9/11, which we all remember, there was a real fear in this country of a foreign adversary, and now to see that new CBS poll that indicates that most Americans are afraid or feel threatened by their fellow Americans is unbelievable, especially given that we're celebrating Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s day today. Jeff, before we let you go, let me ask you about the latest developments into the Capitol assault. We've seen these videos, as you pointed out, that are being released, which is also another mind-boggling thing I want to point out, is for a lot of these people who believe in these wackadoo conspiracy theories about Bill Gates injecting a microchip into you through the use of a coronavirus vaccine, that so many of these people would have had their location service turned on and posted videos of themselves doing these illegal insurrectionist acts onto social media is also sort of, still trying to get my head around that. But Democrats are demanding an investigation into whether or not the GOP and some of their colleagues, or some of their GOP colleagues, I should say, gave tours to some of the insurrectionists ahead of the deadly attack. What are you learning about that?
Well, that is an ongoing investigation. We heard a lot about that last week, where you have fellow members of Congress speaking up, saying that they noticed that there were tours underway the day before the insurrection on Capitol Hill, and that was unusual because during the pandemic, the tours were banned or curtailed, and so that really got people's attention. But I think a lot of this investigation will probably be interrupted because of the inauguration week. However, it'll come back. It'll be one of those investigations that will get a lot of attention, because there is this suspicion that because the mob was able to move so freely around the Capitol building, which is a maze. I mean, if you're not familiar with the building, your first time there, it's easy to get lost in that building. And so the fact that they were able, some of them at least, were able to move so freely and easily through the Capitol buildings, to suggest to some that there may have been some coordination. So those are the kinds of investigations that will continue and certainly pick up steam after this week is completed, or maybe toward the tail end of this week. And it's something to watch, because every day it seems we're getting new information about what happened, or whether there were signs of coordination, what people were saying while they were inside the Capitol, breaking into office. We're doing what our president told us to do, you heard some people on camera saying. Or Ted Cruz, he'd probably be okay with us searching his desk. So these are people who have ingested this sort of ideology, this extremism, and it's really unfortunate. And having been at that rally, which was peaceful at the Ellipse initially as the day started, but I talked to people in the crowd, and they sort of parroted exactly the same sound bites that the president, frankly, has used in recent months since the election, that stop the steal, or it was rigged, and you couldn't get them to think any other way. And there's some people in law enforcement or former law enforcement types who view that kind of view of the world as, you know, these are people who've been radicalized because they've ingested this type of information. That's just not true. There are no facts to support it. And then when you challenge them to back it up with facts, they walk away from you because they get upset. Why? Probably because they don't have the facts to back it up. And what has also happened in this country is that the information sources that they are getting their information from is often the type of information source online, which is another big issue here, is what they've said to me is, you know, they get their information not from reputable news organizations, but from people who make money selling the type of information that they want to hear. And that's a fact. And so when you look at the overall picture of this radicalization, you know, it is something that this country will have to grapple with in the weeks and months ahead.
Very true, Jeff. Thank you, as always, for your reporting. We appreciate it, my friend.